You're listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, brought to you by Global Convenience Store Focus, featuring senior retail executives and experts in the global convenience, fuels, and mobility retail industry. Hosted by Dan Munford, Nick Scherzer, and Carolyn Schnare. Welcome to the Future of Convenience podcast. I'm Carolyn Schnare, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nick Scherzer. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Carolyn. How are you?
It's good to see you.
You too. Good to be here.
How you been? Keeping busy?
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. We just got back from another trip, I guess, to Norway. Really interesting to be in that market and seeing what some of the leading fuel and convenience retailers are doing in terms of the energy transition and adding electric vehicle charging and the whole journey that they've been on there.
Well, good. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that today. You can certainly enlighten us on what's happening over there. And today, obviously, we're going to talk about EVs. We're going to follow up from an episode from a couple of months ago where we started talking a little bit about the EV journey, both here and in Europe, and where we're going and how we're going to get a little bit moving further. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get past that next hurdle, how to really get them going in your convenience store and your retail location. And we have a really great guest to talk to us about that. Before we get started, Kempower designs and manufactures reliable and user-friendly DC fast charging solutions for electric vehicles. The company's vision is to create the world's most desired EV charging solutions for everyone, everywhere. Kempower's product development and production are based in Finland and the US, and most of the materials and components are sourced locally. The company focuses on all areas of e-mobility, from electric cars, trucks, and buses to machines and marine. Learn more at kempower.com. So we are pleased to be joined by Marcus Suvanto, Vice President of Operations and Business Development at a leading charge manufacturer, Kempower. Hey, Marcus.
Hi, Carolyn. Great to be here.
Hey, Marcus.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Marcus, you're based in Durham, North Carolina, right?
Yes, we just had a grand opening 2 weeks ago here in Durham.
Yeah, I saw that on LinkedIn. So that's Kempower's new facility there in Durham, North Carolina. And it looks impressive. I was saying to you earlier, I visited your facility in Lahti, Finland, where Kempower is headquartered. And that's one of the most impressive production and manufacturing setups I've seen for a very long time.
Thank you. And Durham facility is based on that factory. So basically copy-pasted almost everything from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Marcus, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is electric vehicle charging, and particularly in the context of gas and convenience store retail in our industry. And I think one of the big conversations and topics we wanted to get into was talking about partnering with a CPO, a charge point operator, or doing it yourself and bringing it in-house. And it's something we've seen over the last decade, and particularly, thinking of it here firstly from a European point of view, a number of the operators we work with in the early years partnered with CPOs, used their expertise, their brand, and along the way on that journey realized that put a distance between them and the consumer, the customer experience of charging on the site. So that was kind of my question. What is your view on that in terms of partnering with a CPO versus doing it yourself? Some of the pros and cons either way on that.
Yeah, we have seen this same thing that with retail chains, some of them go with the CPO, so they basically lease the land, and then other ones are investing to the EV charging by themselves. Both have definitely pros and cons. If we talk about using CPOs in the retail area, the investment is way smaller. But on the other hand, also the ownership of the customer from the charging goes to the CPO, so retail can't get the visibility to the customer behavior in that sense. I would say working with CPOs, retail chains, they are pretty much the same. CPOs are typically a little bit more mature in the market because that's their only focus, basically building these charging hubs. But also retail chains, they are catching up really fast, especially if they have some CPOs on their sites. They start to learn really fast.
Yeah.
And yeah, typically also the difference is that CPOs, they have their existing applications for phone applications for charging. And sometimes retail chains, they only have their own application related to purchases of products in their retail or purchasing gas. But that's not a challenge for us. Our software can basically provide all the charging related data to the existing apps. So
Yeah. Well,
that can be covered.
Marcus, I mean, one of the things we started to hear over the last 5 years or so from leading gas station operators who had partnered with CPOs initially was this idea that it was almost like a part of the customer experience that sat on at their petrol gas station site that they had no control over, and it was kind of external. And just kind of as an anecdotal example, a customer might arrive at the site, that charge point wasn't working. They went into the store to complain and spoke to the store manager and asked questions about that. And because the site staff didn't feel any ownership or connection to that part of the offer at the site, they kind of said, well, there's a number on the charge unit, give that a call. And I think these gas station operators who we were talking with started to realize they needed to own that customer experience and integrate it into effectively a mobility hub, which is a term we use a lot in terms of roadside retail, where you've got an integrated offer of multi-energy, so fuel, electric vehicle charging, the convenience store, and food offer all working together, and you control that customer relationship. So I think that's been an interesting kind of part of seeing this journey, because I think it kind of leads on to this other point around availability of charging at the site versus kind of balanced with the utilization rates. And I think one of the things we've seen in terms of utilization rates is you kind of want to be in the mid-teens and upwards from a utilization point of view to get a good return on investment, and you, while at the same time you need to balance it with having enough chargers available and enough plugs effectively at the site, so people don't want to queue and they want to trust when they get to the site they're not going to be waiting a long point of time. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that what I have seen in some retail chain locations is that sometimes there's a CPO and only like 2 plugs available on the site. And how I see it is that the industry is growing so fast that it would be like crucial to invest to multiple plugs. And of course, for me, it's like if it's a CPO who is investing or retail who is investing, I don't mind that much as long as they invest multiple plugs. The challenge is that if they only invest to 2 plugs, for example, in the beginning and see how it goes, typically they don't get the best possible experience for the charging because, as we all know, EV chargers, they need to plan their trips. And when they plan them, they look how many plugs each location has. And for them, it's like if they see there are multiple plugs, that's the place where they will go because they have better chance on having available plug.
So, Marcus, is it a chicken and egg kind of scenario? I mean, you're talking about the number of plugs. I mean, here in the States, at least in the US, we're not going to get into the politics of it, but there's definitely a lot of that. And I'm sure it's a lot globally too. It's, do I put more chargers in? Oh, this is never going to happen. It's going to die. There's not going to be an EV revolution. But there is. I really do believe there is, whether it's as quickly as some people want it to be or as we think it might be, or it's a long road. But I mean, to that point, do you believe that retailers should be putting, like you said, multiple chargers? But in the instance that this is going to come along, I mean, we can see the writing on the wall. We know it's coming. It's just a matter of like how quickly you want to ramp up for it. So why are people waiting so much? Why are they reluctant to put in all these plugs, if you will?
I would say that there is also this view that, of course, all the retail chains, they have multiple locations. and they would like to fill as many locations as possible from the beginning. But I would recommend filling fewer sites with more plugs. Of course, they have certain amount of money that they are planning on investing, and I would do it that way, that I would add more plugs to each site, because then they will get better experience on that. Users will start to look for those sites, or they look for those sites and they will use them. I think Tesla is a good example. They, in US and all around the world, they immediately started with multiple plugs, and they have been successful.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, Marcus, that it's about selecting the right locations, because I think what you don't want to do is necessarily put charging at every single location and then be in a situation where only some of those are profitable, only some of them have good enough utilization rates to be getting a return on your investment. So it's really about, and this is kind of the network planning side of things, thinking very strategically about which are the locations you should be putting charging at, but then committing to those locations and providing a customer experience that really shows that kind of commitment. So it's as much about the charging as well as the overall experience there, the amenities, the support, and those elements. Maybe just kind of circling back to this idea of having enough plugs. And I think one of the things that's always struck us about Kempower's solution and what you guys do is this concept of dynamic power sharing. And so effectively using satellite charge points. Do you want to explain a bit to us as an audience? Because there's certainly is a concept that took me a long time to get my head around. Do you want to talk a bit about what that actually looks like and that versus not using dynamic power sharing?
Yeah. Our main product, which uses dynamic power sharing, it's consisting of two parts, basically. Power unit, where all the power is located and all the intelligence of the charger. And then we have satellites, as you mentioned, with small footprint that basically holds the cables and have screen. And this kind of this combination kind of gives you a possibility to use it in a way where the power is located, let's say, it can be up to 80 meters from these satellites. So you can have them close to transformer, for example, on the site, somewhere in the corner of the lot. And then all the satellites with the charging cables can be in the parking lot. So in this way, you don't take much space from the parking lot, but you still have power there to charge the vehicles. And the dynamic power sharing, we can share the power from this power unit to up to 8 different charging cables. And it happens dynamically. So let's say there is a vehicle charging 150 kilowatts, and the state of charge goes up to 80%, and it starts to decline the charging power. It drops to 125. We can move that 25 kilowatts to another vehicle dynamically. And that helps to utilize the power. For me, it's like, it's not necessarily that important to have really much power in the sites, but it's even more important to utilize that power, what you have on the site.
Yeah.
Because with traditional chargers, it's typically so that the power is split in half, and no matter how much the car is using that power, it reserves all that other half of the charger. And yeah, that's a big thing when you think about also profitability of the sites when you are selling kilowatt hours for your customers.
Plus, it sounds like you don't have to break ground potentially like everywhere. So you're on an existing site, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're on an existing site. You've got a big, pad of concrete that you really don't want to break into. You're not necessarily electrified that far out on your property, but it sounds like that is a solution to get around that.
Yeah, that depends a little bit on the sites, that how much work has to be done. But definitely there is wiring between the power unit and the satellite, so that there is always something, but you don't have to have the main cables coming into the chargers, which are really long. It's only like for the power unit, and then from power unit it goes to the satellites with separate cables.
And Marcus, in terms of using a dynamic power sharing kind of solution like you guys have, the cost is really in the power unit more so than the satellite units. The satellite units themselves are relatively inexpensive. By doing this, does it create a scenario where you can add additional charging points, so effectively additional satellites onto the system at a later stage, and therefore, as your customer base grows, with you may have invested up front in the power unit, but then the additional investment in terms of adding satellite units is not as high. Is that true? Is that how it works?
Yeah, and you can actually do it in both. So you can start with, let's say, 2 satellites with 2 charging cables, and you can start with the power unit that has only 50 kilowatts power or 100 kilowatts power. And then you can add either satellites later or power modules later to that power unit. So you can start with our system. If you have, for example, let's say the grid connection is relatively weak on the site, and you only have 50 kilowatt of available power, you can start with our charger and only invest to that 50 kilowatt. But then you still have room to expand it up to 600 kilowatt when you get the stronger grid connection to your site. And the same with the satellite, as you mentioned. You can upgrade it up to 8 charging cables.
Yeah. So it really gives you more flexibility in terms of that planning. I think the other thing, I mean, to your point about the satellite unit and being up to 80 meters away from the power unit, and apologies to the American audience, I don't know what the translation from meters to feet
About
is.
250, 250 feet.
Oh,
Marcus, thank you.
football
250
fields.
feet away.
Yeah.
And that's something we've seen where operators who had parking bays outside the front of their convenience stores have been able to add these satellite chargers to those parking bays with the power unit up to 250 feet somewhere else. And I think, it's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I guess this also comes to, the journey of gas station retailers we've seen here in Europe, who initially, in some cases, put the charging units around the back or at the back of the lots in a way in which communicated to the customer that as an EV driver, you're not that important. And the shift towards thinking about the customer experience and looking after EV drivers, and by putting these satellite charging units right up front outside your store, it creates a different message and allows people to charge there, see the store, access the store, get in and out. There's obviously a whole debate about, people parking in your parking bays for longer, and there's a balance around that. But I think there's ways of making that work too.
Yeah.
Marcus, you've been in this industry a long time. I think you started back in 2009-ish in working for not for Kempower necessarily, but in this space of electric vehicle charging, and you were based here in Europe, now based in the US. I mean, what are your reflections in terms of looking at the journey in the US and where things are at from a public charging point of view and a charging point of view on the go?
I would say US is pretty much in the same situation like Europe was, or let's say Nordics, where I'm from Finland. So Nordics were like 3 years ago. So there was vehicles started to come in, but the public charging wasn't there yet. Of course, we could say that we had public charging points, but most of them were level 2. And DC fast charging wasn't that common. But here, of course, the difference is with Tesla. Tesla has done really good job, in my opinion, building their network. So that supports Tesla drivers, and now in the future also others, and already others with the NACS cable. But I still see that USA is pretty much in the same position as I mentioned 2-3 years ago in Nordics, where DC fast charging network is not large enough. And also at that time, I remember there was a small, let's say, dip in EV vehicle sales. at least in Finland, and people were talking that how does it affect on the charging business, and actually it ended up so that DC fast charging network grew during that time, and then when the EV sales again took off, then we were more ready for those EV drivers in the
Yeah.
country. So that's what I see also happening now in US actually.
There's a lot of interesting kind of points within that, Marcus. And I think one of the big differences we've heard and seen between Europe and the US is the US Tesla dominated so much from a vehicle sales point of view and a charging infrastructure point of view. And I know that's starting to change and it's starting to rebalance, but it's certainly an interesting difference between the two markets.
That's an interesting that we the U.S. is only 2 or 3 years behind where you said Finland and the Nordics and everybody are, because from my perspective, the Nordics are way ahead of us. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're not going to see that for 20 years over here. But that from your perspective, we're only a couple years out, and there's a whole lot of things that could change in between now and then that either speed us up or slow us down. But I guess if you could put your crystal ball hat, obviously you want everyone to buy an EV and start driving them. But I guess that dip that we're probably in right now, because I know EV sales have gone down in the US a little bit. Tesla's making weird news all over the place, whether they're growing, dying, who knows. Today, we'll see what Mr. Musk does tomorrow. But in terms of where we're going, like how much further do you really think we're only 3 years out from growing this EV so that you see them all over the place? I mean, I don't even know that many people that drive them. I don't own one, but I do hopefully expect my next car to be one. But I think the biggest reservation is, where am I going to charge it? I only see one or two. The network's not there yet. So is this the perfect time for growth for retailers, for Kempower, for whomever's putting these chargers in sites to really just ramp it up because it's coming soon?
Yeah, I would maybe compare like Europe and the US, because all the states are different, as we know, in the US, and so are all the countries in Europe. So depending on the state here in the US, there are big differences, and I see that also in Europe we have the same situation. Nordics have been a little bit faster than the others, but of course they are like Holland and countries like that, which are really in fast phase with this. But I see the same in US, so I can't say that whole US is building up really fast. Also, the country is so huge. There are so many vehicles in here. Finland with 5 million people, it's easier to put full of EVs than US, which has more than 300 million people. So that's kind of the biggest difference if I think of it. But still, I would say US in general is now in the similar situation that I saw in Nordics 2-3 years ago. But I also, what you mentioned, Carolyn, definitely in Finland, the growth can be faster than in the US because it's such a small country compared to US.
But yeah, Marcus, I think you're right. I mean, the US is such a vast country, and each state is in a different place in terms of what's happening in its development, similar to Europe and different countries here. But I think in those markets within the US and regional pockets within the US, the pace at which this suddenly moves and starts to pick up it can be really fast. And I think, we've seen that in Northern Europe as well. And you go back 5 years, and 5 years is not a long time, and particularly in business cycles, you suddenly see how quickly that moved on. And I don't think anybody, and certainly from our point of view, we're not saying that or thinking that's going to happen, across all of Europe in a rapid pace either. And for the gas and petrol convenience station industry, it's very much thinking of this as a multi-fuel future at this point, where gasoline is part of that future. It's going to be a dominant part of that future for a long time. But electric vehicles are part of that future too. And I think, in my personal view, in terms of particularly the kind of the dip in sales of EVs over the last couple of quarters, and particularly in the first half of 2024, that these things go in cycles. And I think if you look at it from a motor manufacturer point of view, 6 months of sales dip and some negative headlines is not going to change their long-term strategy in terms of vehicle production. They're looking at this 2025, 2030 and beyond. And so, it's a progression, but certainly within some of those markets within the US, that change can happen quite quickly. And I think, Marcus, you had made the point about just thinking about how you get out ahead of that and take, if you're in one of those markets, to take advantage of the opportunity from a commercial point of view.
Yeah, that's definitely what we are looking into. And as mentioned there, for example, here in US, the DC fast charging network is lacking so much behind that we see here huge potential for our chargers and all the DC. As an EV driver, I have to say that I hope that as long as we get DC fast chargers to the ground, I think I'm happy as an EV driver. But even happier if they are Kempower chargers.
Well, I hope to join you as an EV driver very soon. But Marcus, it's been really wonderful talking to you, and I'd like to invite you back in 2 to 3 years, and we will talk again and see where we are.
Yes,
we'll
that would be great.
Back.
Yeah, Marcus, thanks so much. Yeah, it was great talking with you, and hopefully we'll have you back on even sooner than 2 to 3 years, because I think there's a lot happening in this space and a lot moving forward. So yeah, great talking with you today.
Thank you for having me. Was great talking to you guys too.
Great. Well, Nick, it was wonderful to see you again, and thank you so much for listening to The Future of Convenience.
You've been listening to The Future of Convenience podcast, produced by Dan Munford, Nick Scherzer, Jenna Ferguson, and Lorraine Evans. It is produced, edited, and mixed by Carolyn, Schnare, and music is provided by Jukebox Music. Tune in every other Friday for new episodes, and please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more at globalconveniencestorefocus.co.uk.